Okay, I need to preface this review by saying that I'm quite a big fan of Lovecraft. I mean, there are probably bigger Lovecraft geeks out there. I mean, there are always bigger geeks out there. But I own the complete, complete fiction, all of Lovecraft's stories collected into one volume, which I've been slowly working my way through over the last few months. So I think I'm in a pretty good position to be commenting on a game based on Lovecraft's works. You know, I've read most of the major stories that he's written, and I have fairly decent knowledge. I mean, I played the H.P. Lovecraft Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, for fuck's sake. I mean, so I'm in a pretty good position, not just to talk about this game, but also I'm in a pretty good position to actually, you know, enjoy a game about Lovecraft's fiction and Lovecraft's work. I really, really wanted to like this game, and for the first few hours I did really like it. So, okay, so you play the role of a guy called Jack Walters, who's a private detective, and he's investigating a missing persons case in the town of Innsmouth. Now, if you know anything about Lovecraftian fiction, you'll know that the town of Innsmouth is not a particularly nice place, and certainly not a place where you want to end up for any length of time. It's a pretty dingy fishing village, filled with shifty locals who aren't particularly welcoming, and Jack basically wanders around this town to find these creepy fish-looking weird locals who are obviously hiding something. So he investigates the town for a while, ultimately gets up the nose of the locals, and eventually they end up hunting him and pursuing him. And for the first couple of hours, it is really quite good. It's got this kind of action-adventure, first-person adventure style of gameplay, which works really well for Lovecraft and horror. And there's the odd chase where you're being chased by villagers and whatnot, and the odd stealth section. The stealth sections aren't particularly good, but they're kind of passable, and you can get through most of them. Most of them you can kind of, you know, just force your way through if you're really, really stuck. They don't particularly do much for the horror atmosphere, but, you know, as a big fan of Lovecraft, you can look over it. And you can also overlook the numerous bugs and crashes that happen very early on in the game, especially if you're playing the PC version like I am. By the way, if you really must play this game, don't play the PC version, play the Xbox version. But yeah, basically, once you get a few hours into the game, you'll procure your first couple of weapons, and you quickly realise once you have these weapons that there's no point in doing the stealth anymore, because it's very, very slow and boring, and why bother spending all that time sneaking around when you can just shoot a guy in the head? I mean, even on the setting that I played it on, basically the hardest setting that's immediately available when you first start the game, and ammo's not really a problem as long as you're not going guns blazing all the time. The problem is it just ruins any sort of atmosphere, any sort of threat in that early stage of the game, which is a real shame. And that reliance on kind of combat is very un-Lovecraftian. Lovecraft sort of based games, and even Lovecraft fiction, don't have a whole lot of action in them. You know, if you ever played the Lovecraft tabletop role-playing game, you don't want to get into a fight. If you come across a Lovecraftian horror, you want to run the fuck away. You don't want to get in a fight with that thing. Jesus Christ. Fucking kill you or drive you insane. One of the two. You know, that's if you're lucky. And it's in the sections immediately after you get these firearms. And I'm going to get into spoiler territory quite soon, by the way, so be warned. The game basically loses any kind of focus of what it's trying to be. So you basically go through this section of going through a gold refinery, and it just becomes just an exercise of going through corridors, shooting enemies, and there doesn't really even seem to be any option for stealth. You just have to kind of go in guns blazing, and solving puzzles while you're doing it in this really boring industrial environment. And as if that doesn't kill the game's atmosphere enough, the next section is basically on a boat where you're having to defend this boat from constantly spawning monsters that are coming onto the boat. You just end up basically playing the final section from BioShock. And after that, you basically have to go through a section where you're shooting the ship's turrets at a group of targets. You basically have a few seconds to shoot the gun and then take cover while this huge wave hits the ship. But the problem is, not only is the window for shooting the target so short, and the turret handles like complete arse, but also the targets are invisible because of a bug on the PC version. So unfortunately, it's at this point where I basically gave up on the game and decided not to bother finishing it, because for all the frustration that I'd felt playing through the game so far, it just wasn't worth the bother of finishing it. And that is a real shame, because there is a lot about this game that I like. I do like the atmosphere in some of the sections. I do like the way that a lot of the Lovecraftian horrors are represented, particularly the Shoggoth is done very, very well. But basically an all-around lack of focus, that this game can't really decide what it wants to be, and also just the bugginess and just immersion-breaking stuff in this game, and the extra reliance on combat doesn't help. Basically means that this game probably is not worth your time. So in conclusion, if you want a good horror game, some good Lovecraftian horror, I suggest you play Eternal Darkness on the GameCube instead, because that is a far better representation of Lovecraft stuff, even though it actually is original and has nothing to do with Lovecraft, but it's heavily inspired by him. So that's a fantastic game. Play that. Don't play this. Unfortunately, it's crap. Sorry.